Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM, and this is a show where we hang out and we talk about games that inspire us, games that are beautiful, things that make us want to be better game masters, world builders, designers, and players. And we're continuing our look at Castles and Crusades. Before I get into that, good morning to John Doom and Padre and Tink. Good to see all of you. So, on Tuesday we talked about Castles and Crusades, a game that I love, a D20 fantasy game that kind of cleaves both to the older way of play and kind of modern game design. And I mentioned that there was the world of Aihrde, and kind of left it at that because I wanted to talk about it today. While Castles and Crusades has no inherent, as in baked into the player's handbook setting, it has a lot of assumptions, and those assumptions very much are Gygaxian in nature. There are elves and dwarves, humans, magic exists, and magic works in a very specific way, and adventurers go out and do very specific things, and the gods interact with humanity in a very specific way, and you're all familiar with these ways. It is Gygaxian fantasy at its finest. In fact, it used to be that the core books of the game were sort of divorced from settings, and I mean, aside from an implied one, right, there were obviously fallen empires because we had to have something to delve the ruins of and recover the magic and gold from. But aside from this sort of implied setting, you had to pick up setting books to really, have something pre-packaged, manufactured. And now in the kind of the later editions, and I mean, personally, Jackals is this way. I always find it better when a rule set and a setting are fused, intermixed. They should be together. Games like RuneQuest and Glorantha, Jackals and the Zaharets, a D&D first edition, and Greyhawk. For me, that's the setting that really feels the most like a D&D first edition. And so, I want to take a look at Aihrde today. Aihrde is the setting that is sort of one of two home settings for Troll games. This is the brand new Codex of Aihrde, which is just gorgeous. And again, full color now, all the way through. Great art. I have the older version, which is black and white, kind of throughout. And so Aihrde is the home of what is called the After Winterdark setting. Winterdark was this 1,000-year period where this dark god Unklar controlled the world, casted in winter, and ruled with an iron fist. Unklar has been overthrown. We're now 50 to 100 years, maybe a little bit more than that, after Winterdark. And the world is trying to put itself back together. The Dark Lord has fallen, but so has the empire that kind of held the world together for a millennia. New kingdoms are arising. Old shackles are being thrown off. Old prejudices and rivalries are being renewed. Things that were held in check by the reign of the Dark God are gone. See, Unklar was a lawful evil entity. He built roads, he built an empire, he built a system of government that, while oppressive, kept everything running. And this is the world that is being thrown open to the players and game masters. So if you're a game master and you are looking for a setting to run Castles and Crusades, and which you don't need to, again, the implied setting in the player's handbook is enough for you to just go out and imagine your own world. If you do that, I highly recommend the Castle Keeper's Guide, which we'll be talking about next week, or the Judge's Journal from Acts 2, which is coming out later this year. I think the PDFs are out to backers. You can make your own world. And in fact, that's what most of us have been doing in D20 fantasy for the last 40 or 50 years. but I love a good campaign setting. And here's the thing about Aihrde. It is a good campaign setting. And it's a good campaign setting for a number of reasons that I'm going to get into now. First of all, the world building is fantastic. If you enjoy worlds that are deep, Aihrde has got you covered. It has the Codex of Aihrde doesn't just go through all of the world. You get, the Almanac, which talks about the ordering of the cosmos, the people, the gods, the lands, the kingdoms of a very specific region, as well as the guilds and orders. But it also gives you the mythology of the world, as well as a number of appendices, which is, hey, here are the wars that led up to where we're at today. The calendars, the language, the climate, economic tiers. This is a setting where you can jump into and delve into, and you would not need another campaign book. The stated goal with Aihrde is that all of Troll Lord's interference has already happened. That codex is everything you need to start a campaign and run it forward and make it your own. While they'll put out adventures, the goal is never to have a White Wolf or Planescape style meta plot, which would require people to keep buying the adventures to see how the world changes. The world's not going to change from Troll Lord's perspective. It's going to change from your perspective at the table. Yeah, John, I love good campaign settings. Yes, right, you could string together a homebrew setting, and it would be wonderful. I know you. It would be fantastic. But there is something about a campaign setting that has been put together by people who love it, and not just one person, but by a multitude of people who have been iterating it. And as my friend Richard would say, put some moss on it. There's some moss on Aihrde. You feel that this is a lived-in, played-in, gamed-through world. So, what is Aihrde comparable to? Well, it's got a lot of influences. Tolkien's Silmarillion and Middle-earth are heavily evident as a main influence. It's also very much influenced by the Nordic myths, the Icelandic sagas, Volsung, that sort of thing. But also, and if you watched our interview with Steven, hopefully we'll have another one here this month, highly influenced by Greyhawk. So let's take a step back and say, what does that mean? So there are two main campaign settings in my mind from the early days of Dungeons & Dragons. And in a lot of ways, they sort of represented two possible paths the game could take. There's a road that was taken and a road that was not. So, there was Greyhawk, which was Gary Gygax's fantasy world, and there was The Forgotten Realms by Ed Greenwood. And while they both started as AD&D supplements, they changed in a lot of ways. So Greyhawk is a very medieval fantasy, very much steeped in sort of a low magic. Magic is fading. In the original Greyhawk folio, there's the implication that magic will be gone in several centuries, that it's much lower than it's ever been, and there's a time in Greyhawk's future where magic will not exist anymore. The original Forgotten Realms felt like this. If you get the original black box for Forgotten Realms, it is a little bit more pulp mythic fantasy and heroic fantasy than the high fantasy thing that it very quickly became to differentiate itself from Greyhawk. So Aihrde is a lower fantasy, more humanocentric focused campaign setting than the wild, woolly, high magic setting that Greyhawk has become. Let's pause and look over at the chat here. John Doom, divorcing rules from setting really has a hell of a lot of knock-on effects. It really, really does. I think the best games, the rules and the setting are intertwined. And it doesn't have to be a lot of rules and setting intertwined. Look at Savage Worlds, which I love. A great set of setting rules that are lovingly crafted for a setting is all you need to really make that game hum. Yes, they kind of, the Shattering of the Weave, the Avatar crisis, there's a lot of things that sort of kind of kept kicking up the magic level of the Forgotten Realms. The return of Abir from Abir Torel, the Second Continent, the Spell Plague, all of these things. But there was also a behind-the-scenes thing, a wanting to divorce D&D from Gygax's influence, which meant Greyhawk sort of was allowed to rot on the vine and die. There was a brief moment in 3rd edition where they tried to make the Greyhawk setting at least implicitly stronger. The gods in, I want to say it's 3.0. It's either 3.0 or 3.5. We're the gods of Greyhawk. Cord and Saint Cuthbert, and I can see all of their holy symbols in front of me, but the names elude me. Yes, having almost no money, that's just much less time. Yeah, so there's an advantage to buying a pre-made campaign setting. So what else is there for Aihrde? Well, if you are a huge nerd, like I am, there's a dictionary for Aihrde. I keep this thing handy as I was reading through the codex because there were a lot of terms that are used because, you know, there's some in-world is written from the point of view of the dwarves, that I needed to look at. You can also get a trail guide to Aihrde, which I'm hoping I can convince Richard to do for Amboria. Thanks for that idea, Tink. Which is a travel log of one man's journeys throughout the lands after the fall of Unclor, which kind of gives you just a slice of life, again, travelogue of what this world is like. Additionally, we've got Monsters and Treasures of Aihrde. So this is like the Monsters and Treasure book that I showed off on Tuesday, but this is highly specifically focused just to the world of Aihrde. I don't know that I would necessarily say, as a GM, you need to get both Monsters and Treasures. If you're going to run in Aihrde, you could probably ignore the regular Monsters and Treasures book. You'd probably still need the Treasures portion of it. But some cool thematic monsters for the world. And then, as has come up in the chat, one of the reasons we go to a prepackaged setting, a campaign setting that is published by a company, is for several reasons. One, we've hit a stage in our lives where, maybe we have more money than time. Like most of the game worlds that I run in are either worlds that I built in college or the early years of my marriage, like Tanar, or ones that I have been very graciously and blessed paid to create. Things like Crucible or the Zaharets. But I don't know that I have it in me. Time, creativity, to spawn a whole new deep world building project than the ones that I've already got going on. So the advantage of having, kind of entering into a new phase of our lives is we tend to have a little bit more disposable cash and a little less free time. So the free time we have for gaming, we want to spend gaming. And so picking up a setting book for $20 in PDF or $50 physical book is much easier for us to do. We can read it, we can absorb it. We can use that creativity to ignite the spark of our own imagination and push forward. And let me tell you, the Codex Aihrde is dripping with inspiration. It is ripe for GMs to just take and go and run with. But keying off of that, another reason why I really like Aihrde is the adventure support. There are a ton of modules for Aihrde. And not just modules, but entire campaign arcs. There's the C series, the S series, and the ones that I love so much that I'm going to talk about them next week, the A series. Now, the A series isn't done. Each of these series focuses on a different aspect of Aihrde, if you will. The A series focuses on heroes getting caught up in the machinations of the remnants of Unclar's kingdom, and specifically getting caught up and heading toward Aufstrag. Aufstrag was this great tree that Unclar turned into his fortress. So think Baradur or Isengard. and it has fallen into ruin, but the heroes who overthrew the Dark God could not end the power of his fortress. They didn't delve all of the dungeons. There are still things in the deep. It reminds me of Angband, right? The Valar show up and they rip Melkor out of Angband and they chain him, but they couldn't delve the depths of the dungeons of Angband because they were too dark and they were too deep. And so there's, I think, 15 adventures out right now. Steven has mentioned that he's hoping to do more in the future, really get down deep into the dungeons, because he's just mapped out the upper levels of Angband. But they now have them in this real nice and shiny set of box sets. So this is A0. Oh man, let me open this up. This is where my group is at. We've been playing, we'll play our third year in this, and we're only about halfway through the first third of the A series. So this is A0 through 5, and we'll go into what's in these box sets next week. You have, so that was the Shadow of Aufstrag. You have the Journey of Aufstrag. This is all called the Umbrage Saga. This is modules 6 through 12. And then you have the Dungeons of Aufstrag. There's the tree that is the main fortress. And this one covers A13 through A17. And there's more to come. So if you want to just jump into it, they've got pre-written adventures. And let me say, A0 and A1 are spectacularly good dungeon crawls. The Rising Knight, Assault on Blacktooth Ridge. Spectacular. Padre says, even with a good campaign setting, you may have to do a lot of work. I'm having to rewrite a lot of the material for my 50 Fathoms campaign. Yeah, there's, I'm not saying that it's it's a shortcut, but as a GM, you're still going to want to tweak and change and move and create your own pieces of the world and make it your own. But getting a nice campaign setting like Aihrde gives you a solid foundation to start, especially a campaign setting where the explicit comments from the writers, designers, and company are, this is the starting point. You go do with it what you want. Don't get me wrong, I loved Mage the Ascension. I'm actually getting ready to start a Mage the Ascension campaign. I loved Planescape. I loved Exalted, 1st and 2nd edition. But the meta plot ever rolled on, and you're always caught with this, how much of the meta plot am I pulling in? What do I need to ignore? If I buy this new book, how much am I going to be able to use? Or is it all contingent on the fact that the meta plot has changed? And there's none of that here. Just grab the books and go. Now, Trollord has these all on drive-thru. I'll have links to the Codex of Aihrde. You can also buy it on their store. Their store has really 3 options when you get there. You can you just select in the drop-down box, do you want a physical copy, the PDF, or both? And yeah, again, very impressed with Aihrde. Aihrde has a lot of great content. The maps are gorgeous. The depth is something that really appeals to me as a GM. I always like settings that go deeper as opposed to broader. So next week, we're going to continue our look at Castles and Crusades. We're going to look at the Castle Keeper's Guide, as well as the Umbrage Saga in a little depth. I'm going to have some maps to show off, talk a little bit about my experience in running the first 5-ish adventures in the Umbrage Saga. And we'll wrap that up next week. There's still more to talk about for Castles and Crusades. Again, hopefully going to get Steven back on the show. And until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I am JM. This has been Behind the Screen, and we'll see you all next week. Until then, a good one.